All right. Cool. So what we're going to talk about today is how to track user behavior on paywalls in Superwall. Tracking behavior is a particular part of the product experience that you're going to want to learn about and understand what your users are doing and how they're behaving and how this impacts conversions, what does and doesn't impact conversions, and ultimately help inform your product experience. So your trainers today are myself and Jordan. I'm the head of customer growth and the in-house growth expert. Jordan is our developer advocate who also writes the blog Swiftjective C and is sort of a indie dev extraordinaire. We're going to cover three parts of this topic today. One is understanding which user interactions you should track and what the use cases are. Number two is how to instrument your app to make sure it's set up to send these analytics to your third-party analytics provider so you can do analysis. And the last one is going to be adding custom placements in the Superwall editor and showing you how to do that. So first thing we're going to talk about is deciding what interactions you want to track. What things are important, what parts of the product experience you actually want to track, and then understanding what sort of like things actually like impact or don't impact conversion. So let's talk through a couple use cases. One is I want to understand behavior. I want to understand like who's actually tapping this. Does anyone tap it? You create all these paywalls with different ways to interact with products, additional modals, exit intents. And we want to know can users actually navigate the app? Does anyone touch this part of the paywall? And then more importantly, what parts of those actually contribute to conversion or not? And which parts are actually create lots of friction? So here's a use case for us that we're going to start with. One is I want to track when the users switch between products. This is so common, but it answers the question, do users switch between products and are they exploring what options the user have, or do they just tap through the majority of the time? Like in Superwall Analytics, which products get selected the most versus the least and what the mix is between like, in this case, monthly and annual. But do users explore? Are they clicking around? And then which one do they end up picking most time among users who do not switch between products? And then what's the conversion rate between those two? The next use case is tracking custom user interactions. So here's an example of a paywall where there's a family plan toggle added. So what I want to know is how many users actually tap maybe a view all plans button, or in this case, this toggle, which product those users select, and then how many users tap maybe X on a paywall and then see an exit offer instead of going straight to close a paywall. So these are all things that you want to track and understand, like how do my users behave and how many people are doing or not doing this particular behavior. And then the last one is a key one where I want to be able to track drop off on multi-page flows. So if I have a multi-page paywall with 7 steps, I want to know, do people drop off at a certain point? Do they just button through? What's the user flow completion rate? And so we have all these different steps that we want to be able to track and understand where the drop off is. So those are like a few common use cases that we see this tool used for. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jordan, and he's going to go through the code samples of how to actually set this up in your app.
Cool. Um, let's see. All right. Do I have control, or can you just punch through
I
for
can
me?
I'll punch through for you.
Yeah. There's only a few. So, yeah, the good news is setting this up in your code it's really easy. Basically, everything is going to funnel through the Superwall delegate, and when you use it, there's only one function that you have to implement to get this information. So, also, if you haven't looked into the Superwall delegate, definitely make that your first stop after this office hours because there's so much what I would consider essential things that you can do with it. Go ahead and go to the next slide,
Cool.
Nick.
You want to give a
Okay.
preview of what those couple things are?
Yeah, well, I mean, handling custom events is probably the biggest one. And then also one question that I get that I'm trying to write some good docs for actually right now is like, how do I know if my user is subscribed? So you can get callbacks like that in the Superwall delegate too. So like when they change subscription status from like paid or free or or whatever the case may be, you can be informed of that in the Superwall delegate and then kind of funnel it off to your business logic in a way that makes sense. So, like if you have a lock icon for something that's pro, but obviously to show or hide that, you need to know if they're pro in the first place. So you can do a lot of things like that in the Superwall delegate.
Cool.
All right. So I true to my iOS roots, I write a lot of code samples in Swift and Swift UI. So that's what we have here. So basically at the top, you're seeing just a class that's implementing the Superwall delegate protocol. And then that's where we're going to get this callback for these custom placements to track those behaviors on the paywall that Nick was alluding to. That setup is super simple because all you need to do is when you configure the Superwall SDK, you'll see there at line 12, I'm just assigning to the delegate from the Superwall delegate that I made. So it's as simple as that. Now, one thing I want to point out here, this is kind of a Swift UI centric tip, but I see people miss this one a lot and it makes your implementation a lot easier. If you're using iOS 17 and above, you can use the observable macro and you can put some useful stuff in your Superwall delegate. Like, for example, in my NCAA app, we saw that paywall earlier. That's where I actually have some business logic to show whether they're pro or not pro, because it's a natural point to get that information from Superwall. And since it's observable, Swift UI will redraw the views and stuff based on if they're pro or not. So little tip for you there. So the thing that I want you to take away here is you have a Superwall delegate and you assign it after you configure the SDK. And then we can go to the next slide, Nick. Okay, so here's where it happens. At the top, I wrote just kind of a mock analytics service. So where you see that, just plug in whatever SDK you're using. So it could be Mixpanel or PostHog, really anything else. That part doesn't really matter too much because any of these SDKs will work just fine. And all of them work similarly, right? You have an event and it has optional parameters and you send it off to your analytics provider. So what we're doing here is we are overriding that function called handle Superwall event with info. And this is where you can just get a wide range of Superwall data. Basically, anything that happens from the Superwall SDK is going to show up in here. And I just updated our documentation as well with every single event we have. There's tons of them. So you can go look through that documentation page and see the parameters, the names. I mean, it's for everything, like a paywall's loading, the paywall's closed, the product's loaded, all sorts of things. But in our case, the one that we're interested in is the custom placement event. So you can see there at line 13, I look for the custom placement off the Superwall event info. And then that's where I'll get that placement name and any optional parameters, as well as some paywall information. Now, in our case, what we want to send over is that placement name, right? And I also send the parameters too, in case you've got any extra data there. But all those examples, if you think back to what Nick was showing, like, did they tap this button? Did they toggle between the products? Those are all custom placements that you could put in the Superwall editor. And this is the glue that connects it all together. So the Superwall editor, you have the custom placement, they tap a button, that's going to pipe down to your code right here. And then it's up to you what you do with it. But again, we're interested in analytics, right? We want to know how people use our paywalls. And then that's what we do right here. We send it to our analytics service. So at that point, you can go into Mixpanel or whatever you're using and look at the charts, break down the data, and make some informed decisions. But that's all you need to do from a code standpoint. If you already have a Superwall delegate, you're probably using this function. Just add in the case for the custom placement, add that custom placement tap action in your paywall, and you're all set. And that's good for that slide, Nick. I think that's my last one as well.
It is. All right. So now we're going to talk about how to actually add custom placements in the Superwall editor itself. So this is how you're going to actually set and track these elements. So let's go back to the first use case. Who actually taps this element? And then the real questions I'm looking for are these hypotheses about, do users who compare features convert better? Which plan do they select versus those who don't compare features? Does comparing features before purchasing increase trial conversion and or retention? And then does it increase users exploring features after they convert? And do they reach the aha moment faster? Like, how important is this user interaction actually for following user behavior down the whole conversion funnel? And so in Superwall, I'm going to switch to a different thing where I want to see if users actually view all plans on this paywall. So what I'm going to do is select that element and then tap add action. From there, I want the action to be the custom placement. And when I have a custom placement, it's going to drop in like a placeholder name, but you should change this to whatever you want. So for example, a good tip would be to follow some sort of naming convention for your taxonomy. Taxonomy is a fancy word that just means your event naming convention. So for example, I have this one that says tap view all plans because in this case, I want to see who actually tapped that. Now, what you can do is you can actually make these reusable where if I tap view all plans on another paywall, um, let's say maybe, for example, um, I have like a view all plans element on like a couple different paywalls. Oops. Or I have, let's say, like I toggle between plans. Like it's going to say like selected monthly or selected yearly. So I can basically create an event that can be reused time and time again. Cool. And then from there, once that's saved and published, you can now go create your charts in your analytics platform. I'm going to show you one other use case that comes up frequently, which is I want to be able to track drop off in my user funnel when I have like a multi-page onboarding flow. And that's pretty similar. So for example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the CTA tab and I'm going to add a custom placement to each CTA tab. So for example, I already have this tap action and it already says it's going to increment the navigation of the current index by 1. I'm going to add an additional tap action that's going to come here and it's going to say add a custom placement. And I'm going to say, I know that if I'm on page 1 and I tap the CTA, it's going to move me to page 2. So I'm going to set the name to viewed page 2. Cool. And that's it.